experience personally and then also as a coach, how do you let someone in after trauma? You've shared a little bit about, how to slowly share those pieces of information, but how do you really learn to let someone in and trust them being open to letting them hear your story?
Yeah. So I think there are a few things other than pacing, which is very important. There's a few questions you can ask yourself about a person to know, is this somebody who is proving safe that I can share with? Is this an environment that I will feel loved in and feel seen in? And so the first would be, do you know this person enough to see that their actions and their words line up? So, and that just takes a little bit of time of getting to know someone, whether it's a friend. Because I think girls do this a lot. We'll meet a new friend and it's like we bond over sharing everything about our lives, and then that friend's gone the next month. Or they distance from you and you're like, oh my gosh, like I had this instant bond of connection and now I'm not really friends with this person and it makes me feel sad. So do their actions align with their words, right? The second thing I would ask is, do you believe through getting to know this person that they have the ability to be compassionate and empathetic? A non-empathetic person is, in my mind, I'm just going to say this word, it's a dangerous person to share with because they try to make things logical. And when you're sharing your feelings and your heart, you don't need logic. You need empathy and somebody who, even if they have no bone in their body to understand what you've gone through, will just sit there and try to find something in them that can connect to your story, whether it's the same situation or not. Just connecting to pain. Let's just break it all down. Maybe they haven't been through abuse, but maybe they've been through a level of pain and that's really, or betrayed in some way, and they can tap into what that felt like. So is this person showing you that they can be empathetic and compassionate? And then the last thing is, do you feel seen with this person when you're around them? Do you feel like they ask questions? Are they curious to get to know you? And this is with a friend again, or an intimate partner, so are they asking questions to see you, to understand you? Do they pay attention? So not only do you want them to be empathetic, you want to know that they actually care to see you. And they're not just asking you questions to gain information, but that they're asking questions because they genuinely care about seeing who you are. So some of those things, like I said, take a while to happen, but I would say those are the questions I ask myself. And just quickly on this note, because I think it's relevant, if somebody is pressuring you to share more, because what I've had people say to me is like, okay, you're sharing a bit, but like, I want to know more. And I'm like, yeah, I'm absolutely willing to share more through time. But you need to know what your boundary is and stand firm on that. Because if you share too much too soon because that person wants to know more, you're again betraying yourself. So back to that trust thing. It's like, no, stand firm on what you feel comfortable sharing in the time you feel comfortable sharing it.
That's so wise. I love, especially breaking that down. You did that so beautifully. One of the biggest struggles that I see women struggle with in this area is how does someone be open while still guarding their own hearts in dating? Can you speak to that at all?
Yes. So what I've done in coaching specifically, and this is very common, you've been through trauma, or especially if you, when it comes to love attachment styles, if people know what that is, the avoidant type is really closed off and they're like way more independent and they don't want to share things as quickly because they've learned to deal with it on their own. So there's a lot of people that have learned certain defenses in their life, and one of them is to like not share because that doesn't feel safe, or I can take it on my own. I don't need you to help me with anything. And so what I would say in guarding your heart, what you have to look at is what side of the spectrum are you on? Are you a person that shares everything at once? Or are you somebody who like takes forever and it's like pulling teeth to get the information out? And you'll know what type who you are. You know yourself, right? Hopefully, people have probably said it to you, like, I feel like it's so hard to get into those layers, or people will be like, you're an open book, or you've probably even said that yourself, Yeah. So I would say how I like to think about it is think of it like a scale from 1 to 10. And I call it like the vulnerability onion scale or something. So, because with vulnerability, you want it to be like onions like unraveling in one layer at a time. So think of your scale from 1 to 10, and 1 would be like the basic information of vulnerability. I was raised in Connecticut, I was born in Canada, here's some information about myself, like it's very basic. 10 is like the stuff that maybe I deal with in my family life that's really sacred, really hard for me to share about, and that I don't even really share about publicly. I'm talking for myself. So you need to look at your scale from 1 to 10 and identify some of the big key things in your life, and where do they land on that scale. If you are seeing that everything is 8 to 10, you have to recognize that you have a lot of guards up, okay? And that makes sense, but what are you willing to separate a little bit more? There are some things to hold sacred and really wait to reveal till later on and getting to know someone, but then some things you need to challenge yourself. Okay, maybe this could actually be a 5 or a 6. Maybe it doesn't have to be a 10, you know?
Yeah.
And then simultaneously for the other person, if they're always sharing everything, if everything's in layers 1 through 5 and you're just fully an open book, I would say that's actually not fully healthy. You need to be able to keep something sacred to who you are, because you're a complex, amazing person who somebody needs to earn that. You know, they need to earn the right to really know the depths of your heart. So make sure you're keeping something sacred till you really get to know someone. So the layers 8 to 10. So I map it out on a scale from 1 to 10. You put your vulnerability on there. And then you shift things around, and then you try to practice that as you get to know someone.
I'm really glad that you touched on that, because I think a lot of times, especially after going through trauma in relationships, women can question, and men can question, their worth and how they're worthy of being pursued. And I think it's so important to, in that reminder of, you are worthy of someone, you know, really working hard to pursue you, to be able to access, you know, those really specific parts of your heart. I think that's so special, and something that we don't really discuss enough.
Yeah.
Especially I would love to touch on men who have gone through trauma, because I think that that's also something that's really not discussed a ton, especially in the ministry world. And so what would you say, as far as men who have dealt with trauma, how do men lead and trust their leadership after trauma, especially after second guessing everything that they had done before?
Yeah. You know, I have a special place in my heart for men, and just the culture of masculinity that is really a cultural thing. Like, we make it so that the definition of man is like this strong guy who does not cry and is just pull up your britches and keep moving forward and like, I got this, you know? And truly that's unhealthy. And if we look at the character of Jesus, that was not the character of Jesus. Like, the character of Jesus, if we want to look at him as not only God, but as man, he wept. Like, my favorite thing in the New Testament is like, Jesus wept, period. That's it. Okay. Like, shortest verse, Jesus wept. So, and Jesus as a man wept a lot. We see that so many examples of him weeping, of him sharing emotion with people, not with everybody. That's also part of that vulnerability thing. He only let certain people really into his inner circle. I love that. But Jesus wept. So he shows the power and the strength and the turning of tables, but he also shows the emotions, and that makes a great leader. I think a lot of times it's just, how do we redefine masculinity, you know? And so, gosh, that's a whole conversation. But for men, I think the biggest thing is for men to find other men that they can be open with, you know, and usually that's done in a very small setting of like just 1 to 2 other guys, where I'm actually gonna try to share my emotions. Because, okay, let's just give the example, Sydney. When girls come together and it's like, how are you? Good, how are you? And then we literally gab all night long about how we're really doing, right? We're like talking about it all, and we're probably cuddling on the couch. We may cry. Like, it's very emotional. When guys hang out, for the most part, it's like, hey man, what's up? How are you? Good. How are you, bro? Good. Maybe give like a little tap on the back, and then they like move on. And then they do something, they play sports or whatever, and cool. Like, they watch football, awesome. But the difference is so, you know, like, and I don't want to stereotype too much, but for the most part, that's like kind of culturally how it goes. So that's great, dudes, to totally hang out that way. But then also to make the intentional spaces of like finding like 2 to 3 guys that you are like, hey man, I realize that I've been kind of closed up and I don't know if you really know me. I think you like, we're really good friends. We hang out all the time. But like, I don't actually know if you truly know me. And that's partly on me for not really sharing those things with you. And I want to know you better. I don't think I've asked you enough questions to know more about you. Like, could we like have more intentional conversations like that? I just want to know you better and I want you to know me better. Yeah. You know, it can just, and that feels really scary for guys, I feel like, for anybody, because it's vulnerable and it's emotional, but it just starts there, I would say. And as you do that in the privacy of just one-to-one male relationships, you realize how much power there is with leading in both being strong in this sense, like however you want to say that, but also emotional and soft. It's like, okay, Brené Brown says, strong back, soft front, wild heart. And I love that. You know, I'm like, okay, how do you have a strong back? You know who you are. You are confident in who God made you to be. And you have boundaries, so you're going to be strong on this. But you have a soft front, like I'm emotional. I'm willing to express my feelings and emotions and be empathetic. And then my wild heart of like, I have a zest for life and joy. And, you know, just how do we live that out? Both females and men. Yeah.
That's so powerful. I think that is something that, especially in ministry, is a really big struggle for men, because that a lot of times in the past, masculinity has been defined as non-emotional. And especially after trauma, I think that it's so important for men to be able to work through that and work through that with other men as well. And so I love everything that you have to say about that. As far as one other thing that I know people have asked a lot of questions about have been triggers, whether that's just in general or in their relationships. Do you have any advice on how to address those, how to recognize them, and how to communicate what you're feeling with the people that you're in relationship with?
So I have talked to some psychologists about this as well, just on a friend basis, on top of having a therapist, of course. But I think one thing I want to normalize quickly is like about 50 to 70% of Americans have trauma. And so that's hundreds of millions of people. And so 50 to 70%, I mean, that's a wide bucket, but that's what it's been said. It's like, it's definitely over half the population has trauma. Okay, so first we want to normalize that. A lot of people go through trauma. There's little t trauma, there's big T trauma, which is just smaller traumas that happen in life, and then big traumas like a car accident, a death, an abusive relationship, things like that. But we all have trauma, you know, and so the triggers are a result of their trauma response, you know, and so the best way to think about it is that, like, if you have a drain and a drain is normally functioning, the water goes down, but if you have like a lot of hair in your drain or something clogging it, it just doesn't go down quite the same, and it can kind of get stuck and get clogged. So when you've had trauma, the way your brain is functioning, it's basically like there's just a little bit of a clog. It just doesn't flow exactly the same way after trauma. And so because of that, you have trigger responses. And a lot of our triggers are supposed to be healthy, like trauma responses, the flight, flee, or freeze. That's actually in your system because it helps you. If a bear is chasing you, it's good that you're gonna run. Like, it's good that you wanna like flee the scene, right? That's healthy. And there are healthy responses built into our system. But when we have trauma, those things kind of function differently. And almost, I would say, in cases where they don't need to function, right? Because of the things we've experienced. And so when you're in a trigger, some like common triggers the way you would know is your body reacts. There's a great book called The Body Keeps the Score. And it's all about how trauma just lives in the body. And so basically our bodies tell us a lot of information. Some common trigger responses for me when I know I'm heightened are I'll get really sweaty. I'll just like start sweating for some reason. My heart will start beating faster and I'm like, what's happening, you know? Yeah. Or my stomach will tighten, or maybe for some people it's their shoulders. There's a lot of different, but it's usually a bodily reaction that you can notice first. And so when you notice yourself in a trigger, I'll just walk through like what you can do with that. Well, I would say before we even do that, you should start identifying, okay, what are ways that I have noticed my body react? Is it that I get sweaty? Is it that my stomach tightens? Or is it that like I feel like I can't breathe, or there's something in my throat? Is it that my heart starts beating really fast? What is it that you feel when you've been triggered in the past? And if you don't even know, start paying attention to your body in moments because those things are most likely triggers. Then, as you work through this, become aware. You don't have to be afraid of the triggers. You really can address them. And it takes only a few minutes to address a trauma trigger. So what you do first is, okay, I'm sweating. Actually, I'm just gonna give you an example. This happened yesterday. I was texting with somebody and I started misreading what they were saying. And all of a sudden, like my whole body tensed up and I started sweating and I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm sitting at this coffee shop and I'm like, okay, Kait, you're triggered. You're feeling a sense of a trigger right now. So the first thing is pay attention. What's going on? Okay, I'm tight, my body's tightening, I'm having trouble breathing, I'm sweating. Okay, I'm in a trigger. Then I start calming my breath. The breath is so helpful to just breathe because you normally start being short of breath and you're like, oh my gosh. So just breathe, start slowing your breath in just a minute. And then the second thing is to just pay attention. Okay, this person said something over text that I'm starting to misread. So there's two things happening right now. I'm reading the incoming thing, something's happening to me, that's then bringing up something else. So there's an incoming thought and an upcoming thought. So I'll pay attention, what is that? This person said this, and I'm reacting because this happened to me in the past, and this person did X, Y, Z, and they're gonna probably end up doing that again, right? It could totally be not that, but that's what my brain is telling me based on previous training. So the incoming situation, upcoming situation, so I'm paying attention to that. Then the third thing to do is to just start being compassionate with yourself. Okay, so that's happening. You're experiencing a trauma. You have to be kind to yourself in this process because a lot of times we have a trigger. We're like, stop having a trigger. Like, you get out of this. You've done this so many times. Yeah. And that's, again, shaming to ourselves and not helpful for being able to trust ourselves and speak kindly to ourselves. So have compassion as you work through the trigger. And then the final thing is just to move the emotion out of your body. So maybe that is through deep breathing. That can be really helpful. Box breathing, 4 breaths in, 4 breaths out, just really slow breathing. And then the last step to get out of a trigger is to really make sure that you move that emotion through your body, because otherwise, again, the body keeps a score and it will get stuck in there. So there's some things wanting to come out. So you want to make sure it comes out. For me, oftentimes I like doing breath work. So box breathing, 4 breaths in, 4 breaths out. Breath work can be super powerful to just calm our bodies and our systems, provide oxygen where we are like short of breath. Another thing though, for me, often my feeling is a lot of angst. And so it's kind of a mix between anger and anxiety. It's like angst. Ugh. And so for me, that needs to come out a little bit more powerfully. And usually that's through boxing, or if I'm at home, I'll actually scream or just like, ugh, like get it out. And it could just be a minute of like screaming, punching a pillow, whatever it is. Like, honestly, it's so funny, but it helps so much to just get it out. And I think we've said this before, but I actually, the other day, also went on a run, and so many emotions came up for me just in that run. I was like, I needed that. I was holding so much in, and just getting that out of your body. So for example, with the text that I got yesterday, for me, in that moment, I was at a coffee shop. It wasn't exactly appropriate to just like yell at the coffee shop. So for me, I just did some breathing, and I do what I call breath prayers. So I speak just one phrase of truth over myself, like, you are safe, and I'll say that as I'm slowly breathing. And it reminds me of just a declaration over myself that God is with me, that I'm here and I'm in this moment and I'm okay and nothing's going to harm me. So doing those steps of getting out of a trigger honestly can just take a couple of minutes. I know we went through all of that, but it could be less than 5 minutes, you know? And so if you're in a situation with somebody in the flesh, not over text, but you're in real life, they said something, did something that you feel catches you off guard, you're starting to feel that trigger, I would even just say, hey, I think I'm noticing I'm a little bit triggered at the moment, so I'm just gonna take a sec to work through that. So just give me just a moment. And again, go to the other room, 5 minutes, come back. It really only needs to take 5 minutes. But the problem is when we recognize that we're triggered and we do nothing about it, it's just like bottled up and it will come out. It will come out normally towards the other person, you know, in a way. For me, it's like resentment, anger, lots of crying, and they're like, what just happened? Like, oh, whoops, I should have gotten rid of my trigger a few minutes ago and I didn't. So now I'm projecting onto you.
Yeah,
you know?
that's so real, I think.
Yeah.
Especially kind of as we wrap this up here, one thing I really would love to talk about would be how do we, in dating, decipher between a trigger and actual red flags from someone? Because I know that was a real big struggle for me as I started to date again. You know, what is real and what is actually something that we need to take as a warning and what's really just coming from past trauma?
Yes. So first thing I would do before you start dating again, recognize what red flags you typically miss, because you need to know that for yourself. And that's about self-awareness. So what did you miss in the last person or the last few people? Is it something with anger? Is it that they're really charismatic and then they end up being a little more narcissistic? You know, whatever it is, just recognize what you noticed or what you missed before and make sure you have that written down. Doesn't mean this person is going to be those things. You just have to know what you're most susceptible to. So I would say definitely write down those things, at least 5 things. What do you normally miss? What normally draws you in? For me, I could get really infatuated really quickly. So when somebody is what I call love bombing, for me, that's actually a red flag. If they're love bombing, meaning in the first few weeks, like grand declarations, you are my woman, I want to marry you, I know without it, I'm like, oh, I don't know. You don't really know me yet, you know? And so for me, and that can happen even on the first date. They're like, I know I want to marry you, you're this, that, and the other. I'm like, that's a lot, you know? And so
I'm not quite there yet.
Yes. And in the past, I would have eaten that alive. I would have been like, oh, yes, this is amazing. They really care about me. And now I know, oh, that's usually what got me hooked to people really early on that I should have been more careful with. And I want to know that person sees me over time and they get to know me truly, and then they're saying, I want to be with you, I love you, I want to commit to you. So know what your typical things are that you miss in relationships. And then I would also say this is really important. With dating, and I have to practice this to this day, is when you go on a date with somebody, come back and journal, how do you actually feel, and how do you feel in your body? So not just like, oh my gosh, it was so fun and romantic. Like, what did your body feel? Did you feel really tense? Or did you feel relaxed and safe? Did this person's spirit make you feel like there was a safety? You'll be able to tell in your body what it's saying to you. And so really journal that out after every single day. I think that's really important. And then I'll also recommend, there's a great book called How to Avoid Falling in Love with a Jerk. And it's an amazing book. John Van Epps, who is a Christian and he's a psychologist, he just does some amazing work. He also mentions that anybody can show you anything for 90 days. So be very aware and weary, not that you can't know in 90 days if you want to be with someone, but just know that it's about 90 days before you really truly see the depth of somebody's colors, okay? And so that book, though, is great to analyze just so many other elements of how a relationship should progress. So I highly recommend it. It was transformative for my life. I think it would be transformative for anybody who's been in a toxic relationship, yeah.
Okay, so do you have any advice that you can speak to as to how can someone recognize an unhealthy relationship? How can someone what are some red flags of a toxic individual, or that someone is actually physically in a toxic relationship?
Yes, absolutely. So one thing I would just say, as Christians, we really want to see the best in people. And I will also say the double-edged sword there is that we can become very codependent people that often overlook the unhealth of somebody. Actually, Gary Thomas wrote an awesome book that's just called When to Walk Away from Toxic People, basically. And it's just an empowering book about how to know when you should walk away from somebody. But here are some signs that I've learned this person you may be dealing with a toxic individual. We mentioned it, but gaslighting would be the first. If you are consistently being gaslit, discounted, if they consistently deflect and make it not about you, or not about them, but instead about you, this is a very big red flag. And if you address it to them and they continue to do it, right, or they don't ever change it, that's, again, a very big red flag. You're dealing with somebody who has so much internal shame that they cannot own anything that they do wrong. I mean, that's really what happens when somebody's gaslighting you. So another sign that somebody might be toxic is love bombing, early love bombing. And that's basically just, you're the bee's knees, you're the greatest thing that's ever happened to me, you're my future wife. Now, I will say with the you're my future wife, there are stories where people have said that and they've ended up together. Okay, that's fine. Sometimes God does reveal that to you. However, I don't ever really recommend that you say that in the beginning. And if somebody is just hitting you hard with all these bombs of fluffy bombs, like you want to know that that person's going to stand this test of time with you. They may think you're really great on a first date, but what happens when it's that time of the month and you're overly emotional, right? And it doesn't make any sense. Like, what are they going to think of you then? You know, yep. Like the moments where you are triggered or you have a reaction that you're not as proud of. Like, are they going to still say the same exact thing? So love bombing can be something that a toxic person uses to get you into an infatuation with them, which then is a part of the abuse cycle, because that's the honeymoon phase, the love and affection phase. They really wrap you in that. And then they slowly lead to some sort of an abusive or toxic act. So love bombing, also codependency. So somebody who just constantly needs to kind of be in control of what you're doing or want to know everything about you to a point that's unhealthy. And they are there. You can tell that their livelihood depends on being able to control what you're doing. And actually, I'll just say as well that normally toxic people are very controlling in very many ways. And one way that you can also tell that this is possibly a really bad relationship to be in is if they don't ever want you guys together to be around other people. If they constantly want to isolate you, just slowly, I just love being with you, baby. Like, it's just you and I just really love that time. It comes off as sweet. Right? And you're like, oh my gosh, she just wants to be with me. That's so nice. But what you realize over time is they're trying to avoid any situation where anybody else from the outside would have eyes on your relationship. They want you just with them so that you become super dependent on them and so that your relationship is also not seen by anybody else. And it comes off, again, as very alluring and great, but over time, it's a tactic so that nobody else has eyes on the relationship and therefore can't help you recognize some of those red flags.
That's so true in every aspect of the toxic dating that I've experienced. Yeah. Especially once you realize that, once someone notices, hey, I am in a toxic relationship or I need to get out, what is a really good first step to start to make your way out of that relationship? Because that can be so hard.
Yes. First thing is, again, write down how you feel around the person. You know, it's really important to do that internal work first. How do I feel about this person? Because when you're in the moment telling someone, you'll often forget. And your brain will go to like all the fuzzy things and the good things, and you'll start to go to what I call black and white thinking. So black is the person's all bad, white is the person person's all good. And the reality is most people are gray. Like we have to be able to think in the gray, not just in black and white silos. And oftentimes our brain wants to go back to the white, but they're so great and they're this, that, and the other. And so you want to be able to have it written down, the actual examples of things that have happened that make you feel really discounted or unheard or confused. You want to have those written down examples. And then you want to bring those examples to a trusted person. You have hard facts of like, this is what I felt after this situation. Because as the time goes by, that person gets you back in the cycle, you're going to forget how you felt specifically in that one moment. So when you journal it and then are able to bring it to somebody, you can clearly say, oh, this is how I felt actually, you know? And so you want to be very specific. I mean, that is what's helped me so much. Like, again, how do I feel after I'm with this person, after a date with this person, after spending time with them? What do I really feel in my body? If something bad happened, a conflict happened, how did I feel after that? Did I feel like I just crossed all my boundaries, I didn't stand firm for myself, and I just apologized when I didn't really need to apologize? How do you feel, you know? So then bring that to somebody, and then hopefully that person, as a safe person, will be able to speak love and truth into your life and help guide you out of that relationship. Depending on how toxic it is, if it is an abusive relationship, I definitely recommend calling the National Domestic Violence Hotline, because they have so many people on standby to really help you in those situations specifically. But outside of that, tell somebody, one person, and document it so you have the hard facts of what you really are experiencing. Just to avoid this altogether, I would say, make sure you are, no matter what, in a relationship, surrounding yourself with just a handful of people that know you, that know your past, that know some of your tendencies, and that can speak into your relationships. So that's both done on an individual level. So I need to have my close people I'm talking with on the side, like, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I'm feeling. That will help me be able to sort out like the differences between my triggers versus red flags. But then secondly, you want to also bring that person around your core people. Now, I always steer clear of saying that you want that person around everybody. You don't want them around everybody, because everybody isn't always the best voices. You know, everybody's like, you guys are so cute together. Oh my gosh, like I can totally see your name with his last name. And those kinds of things, if this person is actually not healthy for you, those aren't good things to be hearing. You need just at least a few close people, some close community who know you, your tendencies, your past, who are going to be able to speak truth and see this person from an outsider's perspective. And you want that to consistently happen throughout the relationship.
Well, Kait, thank you so much for your vulnerability, for sharing with us. I know that this had to be so impactful for so many of you. I hope that this really was great for you guys, that you felt like you could learn something and grow from here. If you would like to learn more about Kait and what she's up to, we're going to include her handles for you guys. We're also going to include her website and even some details for her book, which is very exciting. So check those out. And if this is something that you've really struggled with, if this is something that we can be praying for you about, we want to know. So leave a comment, DM us, let us know, and we would love to be praying for you. And so thank you so much, and we will see you guys next time.